Today we are starting the video off with our sponsor, Imprint, an online, visually robust, interactive, and concise learning platform based upon established learning science. If any of you are like me, you're always trying to be as efficient with your time as possible. It's a limited resource we must respect. And if you're here, it's because you enjoy learning, likely around many subjects. So why not utilize the best tools at your disposal? Imprint is a genuinely wonderful option with exclusive courses such as Essential Philosophy, Science of Happiness, and more around communications, finance, or decision making. Whether you find joy in learning, have a set life goal you are trying to achieve, Imprint offers a solution that is genuinely rewarding, accessible, and most importantly, designed to stick with you and last long term. One of the biggest things I personally enjoy about Imprint is that I can learn at my own pace and create a learning environment tailored to me specifically. You can try everything Imprint has to offer completely free for 7 days with a special offer of 20% off the annual premium subscription. All of this with the link in the description below. What is philosophy is quite the provocative title. Many have attempted to answer this, many have practiced philosophy or other fields of study with the full presupposed idea of what philosophy is. In 2024, this question may seem redundant. If we don't know what philosophy is, what have we been doing the past 2,000 or so years of human civilization? We've seen entire subfields in philosophy pop up, from metaphysics, political theory, epistemology, and phenomenology, but many of the questions posited from these fields have yet to be adequately answered. And it seems even more absurd when we understand that nearly every academic discipline from physics, biology, to history has, in a sense, stemmed and relied upon philosophy proper. It seems silly on the surface, but is it possible, in all of academic history, we've been pursuing things in a framework we still yet to fully understand? Luckily for us, though, we're not approaching this question from isolation. We still know, or perhaps feel, what philosophy is. It's just that, in many ways, it forgoes language. It's an expression beyond the expressionable. Expression is important here, and we will get more into that later. Philosophy is such a core baseline of our existence that luckily we cannot answer this question empty-handed. Someone like Socrates may say it's the pursuit of wisdom through dialogue. Thomas Aquinas may have had religious connotations, arguing it's the use of human reason in understanding God. David Hume may say it's an empirical investigation into human nature or our capacity for knowledge. Hegel may argue it's a dialectical process that moves into his idea of absolute spirit. Yet I would argue my favorite interpretation is one that comes much, much later, and it's arguably the most simple out of them all. This example is primarily found in the 1991 text, What is Philosophy?, the last major work from Deleuze and Guattari, two French post-structural philosophers operating in the mid to late 20th century. From the very start of the book, Deleuze and Guattari are operating on the idea we have actually got a solid idea on the question, but it's absolutely not what many might imagine philosophy to be. They state,
we can at least see what philosophy is not. It is not contemplation, reflection, or communication. This is the case even though it may sometimes believe it is one or other of these, as a result of the capacity of every discipline to produce its own illusions and to hide behind its own peculiar smokescreen. It is not contemplation, for contemplations are things themselves as seen in the creation of their specific concepts. It is not reflection, because no one needs philosophy to reflect on anything. It is thought that philosophy is being given a great deal by being turned into the art of reflection, but actually, it loses everything.
On what isn't philosophy, on the outside, this may not seem like a significant point to make. Yet, in so many ways, and in different subfields embedded in philosophy, this tears down a ton of existing ideas on not only what philosophy is, but how it's conducted, particularly a more structural approach. We'll elaborate here. A ton of contemporary philosophy is split between structural and post-structural philosophy, or perhaps specifically, a field in philosophy, that being metaphysics. Linguists such as Ferdinand de Saussure, sociologists such as Emile Durkheim, and in retrospect, during a time where structuralism wasn't a widely used term, we could argue a philosopher like Hegel. Whether it be language, society, human behavior, or larger philosophy, there were and are thinkers who view these things as interconnected parts, interconnected systems that relate back to one another in an explicit sense. This contrasts the idea of post-structuralism from thinkers like Deleuze and Guattari, Foucault, and Derrida. While not entirely opposed to the idea of structured systems and interconnected parts, they believe that when you look closer, it's not entirely evident that these connections or structures actually exist at all. In the sense of language, society, and our varied inlooks, there spans meaning that are disjointed and multidimensional. To post-structuralism, the idea that we can centralize a type of truth or a concrete framework to analyze nature, politics, society, is a very spotty assumption to make. Essentially, the idea that the deeper we peel back the structural layers, the less clear things become. This may be a confusing summation, as it's a very abstract, high-level overview of the structural, post-structural debate, but it's necessary to lay down some groundwork here. Perhaps for more clarity here in how I approach these frameworks, I quite like structuralism when analyzing systems deriving from human organization, using these frameworks to understand class conflict, media analysis, and politics at large is still very useful, and where I think structuralism may be at its best. But for things like metaphysics, understanding nature, or epistemology, how we can deduce types of truth, I think this is where post-structuralism works best for me. In many ways, post-structuralism seems to be a lot more honest about the things that are still very much out of our reach. To me, it seems more equipped to analyze things that are much more difficult to structurally analyze, which, in my mind, are things like metaphysics. Things beyond sense, such as sight and sound, but at the end of the day, this is just me. I'm not here to convince you. We just need to understand where Deleuze and Guattari are approaching this question, and to make it a little easier in its application, I figured adding where I look at this might help. Another thing here, because we're operating on iterative philosophy from the 1990s, which is pretty recent, if you want to understand more about how Deleuze thinks about metaphysics, or nature, reality as it may, I did a video highlighting a ton of Deleuze's work on difference and repetition, which goes into those things. Consider checking out the video above. So, working back to the central question of what is philosophy, let's look at one of the most important things in philosophy proper, that being concepts. I think we can all intrinsically and internally understand what concepts are, but there is debate about how concepts are derived. Now, I know this is probably the most boring thing we could discuss around an interesting topic, like what is philosophy, but concepts, centralized ideas such as alienation, ideology, justice, moral values of good or bad, are the bedrock in which we are able to build and systematize philosophy. For centuries, many have argued the central ideas in philosophy, in science or mathematics, is that these fields or concepts are either discovered or created. In the realm of philosophy, right out the gate, Deleuze and Guattari are insistent that concepts in philosophy are in fact created. Matter of fact, if we are to get at the core of philosophy, creation is at the very center of it. Let's delve more into this. So then, we can define concepts as complex constructions of ideas meshed together with multiple components. Where does the origin or need for these constructions even begin? There's two main areas. The first is the plane of immanence. This sounds a bit confusing, but we'll explain. To Deleuze and Guattari, before we even get to the concepts, problems arise that necessitates them in the first place. The very first thing is we pull from an innate, inherent, and immanent area. This pre-philosophical bedrock that gives us an image of thought that then spurs the process of concept creation. They state,
The plane of immanence is not a concept that is or can be thought, but rather the image of thought. The image thought gives itself, of what it means to think and make use of thought, to find one's bearings in thought. It is not a method, since every method is concerned with concepts and presupposes such an image. Neither is it a state of knowledge on the brain and its functioning, since thought here is not related to the slow brain as to the scientifically determinable state of affairs in which, whatever its use and orientation, thought is only brought about.
To visualize this, we may be able to define this plane of immanence as a subconscious capacity or springboard that allows us to think in such a way where we create. With this, there's one other big area that informs this plane. That is Deleuze and Guattari's idea of conceptual character, or explicitly in their language, conceptual persona. This idea denotes a figure, voice, or personality that works on the side of the concept creation process, similar to the plane of immanence that can be seen as a discrete capacity or a part of our mind. The conceptual character is a form of thought embodied as a philosophical other. This sounds a bit confusing, so here's some examples. One is Socrates and Plato. Socrates didn't write, but he was a master of sorts to Plato. Thus, Plato carried with him a part of Socrates that informed his writing and progression of concept creation. Deleuze and Guattari explain this phenomenon as a psychosocial type within a philosopher's creative process. There's certainly more by way of the construction of concept creation in Deleuze and Guattari's text, but these are the big two that make up that structure, if you will. But there's some points here that they want to make. Some things that are contained within the plane of immanence and the conceptual persona that they deem important to analyze. So with that, I want to ask everyone to buckle up, because this is where the Deleuze and Guattari stuff happens, and this all can be a little complex to newcomers. When engaging with creation itself, Deleuze and Guattari highlight some things here. And in What is Philosophy, around the topic of geophilosophy. First, we need to do a bit of background on Deleuze and Guattari's concept of deterritorialization and re-territorialization. In the most basic of explanation, deterritorialization is a process of breaking from established norms, systems, and, in their words, territories. It's how humans move away from fixed structures of society and normative human behavior. Now, re-territorialization is the complementary process where this new territory stabilizes. Yet, they are insistent that these complementary processes are a part of the same overall process. Language forces us to describe reterritorialization and deterritorialization as separate, but Deleuze and Guattari are adamant these are a part of the same process. To make this easier to understand, here are some implications. With this in mind, in philosophy, historiography more specifically, a traditional way to look at history is something linear and progressive, something that moves forward. We can visualize this with a set line that moves forward and progresses onward. Now, to contrast this, Deleuze and Guattari might argue that history is more accurately seen as a blurred sphere that spins in accordance to this territorialization process. I thought this might be a bit of an easier visual to grasp, as Deleuze and Guattari actually account this visual as a rhizome. That said, opening this area up probably necessitates another video, so I will keep things as simple as I can here. Another huge example Deleuze and Guattari use is capitalism. It's a system that must break down and rebuild consistently. We've seen capitalism move from monopoly capitalism, neoliberalism, postmodern capitalism, what have you, with each new territory solidifying around specific points. It transcends borders, culture, and even governance. Thus, Deleuze and Guattari see this as a materialist metaphysics that spurs movement. Yet, there's something more specific on an individual level, a theory that Deleuze and Guattari pull from. That is affect. This requires understanding Spinoza's theory of affect. Spinoza, in his text Ethics, theorized an underlying will, or drive. In modern terms, we can use emotion, that is, transferable between people. In simple terms, when people are happy, or they are sad, depressed, these affects alter the potential for human mobility and desire. With my dull explanation, this sounds incredibly basic. The idea that if you're depressed, you're less likely to go outside and be human isn't exactly novel, but using this theory of affect in a larger socio-political or philosophical sense, the implications can be quite drastic. If you want to learn more about Deleuze's use of Spinoza in his own thinking, I made a video on this very topic. Link above. So now that we have some cursory knowledge on the concept of affect and the larger theory of what we would call territorialization, we can see how Deleuze and Guattari use it as a baseline to understand the ways in which philosophy is created. The worlds we inhabit, the societies in which we live, all affect the ways in which concept creation unfolds. Whether we live in feudalism, capitalism, where we exist on Earth, our nationalities, our sex and gender, it's all a part of amalgamation that informs both the plane of immanence and the conceptual persona. All things a part of this creation. So, with all of this in mind, process, creation, affect, territorialization, what might we deem as philosophy? Well, let's hear it from them.
Philosophy is the art of forming, inventing, and fabricating concepts. It is not the search for an unchanging essence of the concept or a truth beyond concepts, but the production of new concepts and their use in the formation of the new ways of thinking about and understanding the world.
Obviously, philosophy can be a lot of things, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. Yet, when it comes to answering the fundamental question, Deleuze and Guattari settle on one denominator, that being creation. That's what philosophy is and must be. Creation. Now, in my mind, this is where stuff gets interesting. The conclusion of philosophy itself being creation, a creative process, might not sound significant, but it certainly holds academic implications if we are to take this thesis seriously. The first thing is how philosophy interacts with science. Deleuze and Guattari see, in an academic sense, three domains: philosophy and its pursuit of concepts, science as production of functions and propositions, and art as something that generates affect and a type of focus. Deleuze and Guattari also do not find these three domains hierarchical. Each domain would be utterly lost without the other. We're taught that philosophy is often bent on commentating, or the interpretation of science, or philosophy is a grand pursuit of truth. Deleuze and Guattari also reject these notions, as the presupposition for this line of logic is that philosophy unfolds via processes like the dialectic, or a type of structural exchange, which we know Deleuze and Guattari don't find to be the case.
Il nous raconte une histoire qui paraît très belle, très convaincante. Il dit, voilà, il y a la certitude sensible, la conscience empêtrée, c'est le départ de la phénoménologie de l'esprit. La conscience enlisée dans la certitude sensible. Et elle dit, le sensible, c'est le dernier mot des choses. Là, les philosophes anglais peuvent se dire, il est déjà en train de nous trahir, cet Allemand. Il est déjà en train de nous trahir. Mais à la limite, il dirait, oui, peut-être que nous, on peut dire ça, on a dit ça, oui, la certitude sensible, elle est première et dernière. C'est en effet un thème qui parcourt ce qu'on appelle l'empirisme. Et comme chacun sait, l'empirisme est anglais. Bon, alors, voilà. À la conscience prise dans la certitude sensible. Elle épouse la particularité, la singularité. Et Hegel, splendide, analyse la singularité et va montrer que c'est une position intenable parce que on ne peut pas faire un pas sans précisément dépasser ce stade de la certitude sensible. Et pour le montrer, il dit voilà, la conscience sensible est comme déchirée, ça va être ce déchirement qui va être le premier stade de la dialectique de la phénoménologie de l'esprit. Elle est comme déchirée car elle croit saisir le plus particulier et en même temps elle ne saisit que l'universel abstrait. Pourquoi elle croit saisir le plus particulier? Elle croit viser le plus particulier dans le sensible et elle l'exprime en disant « Ceci, ici et maintenant ». Mais comme dit Hegel, qui à ce moment-là devient presque rieur, alors qu'il n'en a pas l'habitude, ici et maintenant, c'est l'universel vide, puisque c'est de tout moment de l'espace, de tout lieu, de tout lieu de l'espace que je dis ici, et c'est de tout moment du temps que je peux dire maintenant. Au moment même où je crois saisir le plus singulier, je ne saisis que la généralité vide et abstraite.
Philosophy must inherently create, build, rather than unfold in a teleological process we see within structural philosophy. The same goes for the concept of truth as a universal, something that can exist beyond the social bounds of the material world around us. This is something that Deleuze and Guattari find very spotty.
In the first case, sensation is realized in the material and does not exist outside of this realization. It could be said that sensation, the compound of sensations, is projected onto the well-prepared technical plane of composition in such a way that the aesthetic plane of composition covers it up. The material itself must therefore include mechanisms of perspective, as a result of which the projected sensation is realized not solely by covering up the picture, but according to a depth. Art thus enjoys a semblance of transcendence that is expressed not as a thing to be represented, but in the paradigmatic character of projection and in the symbolic character of perspective.
This is a section where Deleuze and Guattari discuss how art is composed and interacted with. Yet it's also a larger point about how senses, material objects, and desire all converge together. This also creates implication beyond truth or scientific theory. Things many might maintain are just mere abstract academic pursuits with no real basis in our day-to-day. Yet, I'd argue there's some genuine, real, metaphysical, or even sociological implications to how we may conduct life. Something much more felt in this day-to-day existence. It's no secret Deleuze and Guattari hold art to an incredibly high degree of esteem. With the function of philosophy, art may not create concepts, but they do create affects, which in turn forms the way in which we live. This is, in many ways, why Deleuze and Guattari are against the prospects of things like debate as a way to build, to educate, or even inspire. It's hinged upon an antagonism rooted in philosophical negation. It isn't bent upon creation in the end. For a small refresher, many in philosophy see nature or existence as a negation, an empty chasm from where we positively build our existence. What we could call our subjectivity, our concepts of self, society, and the other things we conceptually interact with. If you want to learn more about the concept of negation, one of the videos that probably goes into that the most is a video on Zizek and Lacan that I made. Link above. Now, let's talk about this antagonistic framework. Have you noticed that between nearly every facet of society, civics, even at times basic communication with others, there's an almost idealistic backdrop of debate as virtue? We see this in government, the legal system. Like, the way we seek truth is to encompass an ideal and go to war with it. In another common phrase, the marketplace of ideas, if you will. To Deleuze and Guattari, no shit, so many structures in society are antagonistic to normal people when even the most basic academic framework of philosophy is so centered on that very antagonistic process. This isn't to say that debate or the ability to resolve issues by way of communication is never a positive thing, just that it often comes at a complete expense of creation. Not only in philosophy, but outside of it. As Western people embedded in this line of logic, we often think along these lines. Our decisions are often made as a result of an antagonistic dialogue to how we want to conduct our lives, the decisions we make. Things we choose to do or not to do based upon fear, based upon what we could call negative affect. So, my favorite implication here is that, in a sense, beyond just philosophy, creation should be at the forefront. Perhaps as an argument we could make here is that there's an almost metaphysical capacity for creation that is stifled by this rigid modern logic. We see this in the workforce, we see it in academia, the state. Nearly all facets of contemporary society are at best not too concerned with creation as a logic for life, or at worst, depending on their position in society, see creation as inherently detrimental to their existence. And, for some people, maybe it is. On the final section of What is Philosophy, they harken back to a collection of essays released solely by Felix Guattari himself, titled Chaosophy. I won't go into large detail here, but a thesis intertwined within Chaosophy is that this philosophical idea of subjectivity that's been discussed for hundreds of years, how we identify as selves, our relation to others, that main sense comes from processes that form through and are embedded in chaos. Again, Deleuze and Guattari do not see a world through linear structure, but something more fluid, multidimensional, and constantly moving. Something that represents infinity, chaos if you will. There are no bounds, at least yet, to what creation could hold. Not only current creation happening now, but the potential for a world that focuses on it. I think an ending section from Deleuze and Guattari sums up the prospect of art, creation, and the ability to go beyond set confines well.
Perhaps the peculiarity of art is to pass through the finite in order to rediscover, to restore the infinite. What defines thought in its three great forms, art, science, and philosophy, is always confronting chaos, laying out a plane throwing a plane over chaos. But philosophy wants to save the infinite by giving it consistency. It lays out a plane of immanence that, through the action of conceptual personae, takes events, or consistent concepts, to infinity.
Thank you all for watching and making it to the end. I want to give a huge request here. This channel wouldn't be here without the people who help support the channel over on Patreon. Get early access, ad-free viewing of videos, Discord access, some exclusive content, and even get your name on the credits if you'd like. I want to give a huge special shout out to these patrons in particular who go above and beyond: Cedric Watman, Kate, Kevin Hoop, and Jay Roberts. Thank you guys so much. That wraps up the video. I will see you all in the next.